Okay, well, I have the privilege and pleasure of starting off tonight. This project, Exploring the Legacies of Live Theatre for Young Children, was Create's very first commissioned research project. And I wanted to acknowledge, first of all, Barking Gecko Arts, who we are working in partnership with, and thank them for the privilege of working with them. And at the same time, I also want to acknowledge Helen Rostovsky and Luke Kerridge. Helen Rostovsky was the CEO at Barking Gecko when she first asked this question: what do children wonder about after they experience live theatre? And also Luke Kerridge, who was the artistic director at the time and also was deeply engaged in asking these kind of questions and supported this project too. I also wanted to thank Michelle, who has been involved right from the beginning and has really championed this project. And I wanted to thank you, Michelle, for joining us tonight. And also, I wanted to thank the rest of our team who couldn't necessarily be here tonight. Eliza Oliver, Katie Alexander, Michael Anderson, and Catherine Smythe. So I guess one of the things that you might be asking is, why? Why this project? Why exploring the legacies of live theatre? Well, when we did the research review, it was clear that while there are some impact studies on this, there's a common sense notion around that live theatre is ephemeral and that after it's over, that's it. That children don't necessarily take it on board, they don't necessarily do anything with it. Now that has been dismissed to some extent by some of the projects that have been done, particularly the work that the Victory Theatre has done in the States. But most of those studies have looked particularly at literacy outcomes, and there are very few that are longitudinal. So while literacy outcomes might have been looked at immediately during and immediately after the project, there isn't a lot that looks at what endures. Does the theme, the plot, the experiences of the characters, do the characters themselves linger with children? Do children wonder over time about these? Do they come back to it? And if so, can arts-rich workshops help deepen that meaning, help extend that legacy? If so, how? So that's just a little bit about the why of this research. Over to Thomas.
Thanks, Robyn. So when we first went to Barking Gecko in Perth and began the process of planning this research project, there were a number of things that we wanted to include in it. We wanted it to be longitudinal, which for our purposes means we wanted it to sort of go for a long time and sort of measure the legacy impacts over a long period of time on the young people who attended the live performances. We were quite interested in we're interested in this for all of our research projects at Create. We wanted to co-design it with Barking Gecko. And so we had a number of meetings sort of designing the workshops, the research questions and so forth. And we really wanted it to be child-centered. And so basically what we came up with was a project that followed children across time rather than capturing only an immediate response after they had witnessed a performance. The young people would attend a Barking Gecko live theatre performance and then they would essentially return to that performance over time through a series of arts-rich classroom-based workshops. And we video recorded these sessions, and that material was later analysed alongside reflections from the teacher artist who delivered the workshop. And our broad aim was to trace essentially what endures. We were interested in what children remember, what they keep returning to, what feelings or ideas remain vivid, and how those responses might have shifted or deepened through repeated engagement with the workshop content. And we focus on primary age children who are around 8 to 10 years old and the children that were involved in this research project are from 2 low fee paying independent schools. And over a 2-year period, they participate in workshops that explore memory, emotion, meaning making, connection, and collaboration. The Inspire program was what covered the cost of access to these these performances. And so Barking Gecko's Inspire programs help reduce some of the barriers that would often prevent children and young people and schools from engaging with high quality live theatre. And those barriers might include just the cost of tickets, transport, or particularly in a Western Australian context, geography. And this really matters because if children only ever have a one-off theatre excursion, it's much harder to think about legacy, continuity, or sustained cultural participation. And so, what access programs like Inspire make possible is not only attendance, but sustained engagement, which is something that we're interested in exploring in this project. They create the conditions for children to encounter theatre, revisit it, and continue to think with it over time. This is also where the importance of the research partnership comes in. So the collaboration between us as a university and the theatre company Barking Gecko allowed us to align artistic intent, the educational purpose of this work. We were quite interested in aligning on child voice and then also research rigor in a way that neither we or they could have done on their own. So far, the study is centered on 2 Barking Gecko works, and they are House and The Snow. So House was written by Dan Giovannoni, and it explores themes such as belonging, friendship, self-realization. It presents the idea of a rescue house that befriends lonely children. I've had the great privilege of seeing House, and I also own the picture book that it's based on, which was kindly given to me by one Professor Emerita Robyn Ewing. And it's an emotionally rich text, which I think lends itself strongly to the theatre, but also questions of connection and care. Then the second show that we're focusing on in this project is The Snow by Finnegan Crookmeyer. And this play basically brings us into an encounter with a very different imaginative world. It involves an epic snowfall, a catapult, which the young people referred to numerous times, a great splat of people that get in the catapult and are flung forward a couple of 100 miles, and a search for solutions in a society. The Snow really opens up themes of creativity, problem solving, resilience. What mattered for us was not only the content of these works, but how children continued to remember, imagine, and question them in later workshops. And we were interested in the kinds of ideas, images, and emotional moments that kept resurfacing for the young people. So our research questions and what we looked for were essentially centered around sort of 2 broad research foci. And the first was, does theatre matter to children? And if so, how and why? And the second question was, what happens when young children who are not regular theatre goers are given sustained access to live theatre and post-show creative activity over 2 years? These were deliberately open-ended questions. We were not looking for like a single measurable effect. We were much more interested in signs of imagination, curiosity, hope, sustained memories, and sustained feelings over time, particularly in terms of what the children understood as relevant and having meaning, and the value of facilitated and arts-rich workshops. So in many ways, the study is asking both what remains after the performance and what kind of conditions help that remainder become visible. Robyn.
So we've already talked about having 2 low fee paying independent schools involved with their year 3 and 4 cohorts. We weren't able to research in the government schools because 2020, as you remember, was the onset of COVID, followed by a number of periods of lockdown in different states. And one of the things that some education departments decided after the lockdowns was not to allow researchers into schools because teachers and children were coming back after COVID and some of the trauma that induced. And so they had decided we wouldn't be able to go into government schools. So we were very grateful to Barking Gecko and later Barking Gecko Arts for negotiating with these 2 low-fee paying independent schools. They are very culturally and linguistically diverse cohorts with a broad socioeconomic range. Those children have to date experienced recurrent workshops after 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months of those 2 performances. We, of course, wanted to take a very ethical approach, as we all do when we're researching. We particularly wanted to make those contexts child safe. And of course, both parents and caregivers and children gave their consent. The workshops were co-designed with a real emphasis on them being fun, that the children would feel safe, that they would feel ready to take risks, and at the same time that it would be non-intrusive. Of course, their class teachers were present during the workshops, and some of the class teachers were able to engage in the workshops more than some of the others. We wanted, again, to really provide the opportunity to hear children, to listen to their wonderings, to listen to their thoughts and what they were feeling, and to help them through embodiment to be able to express their emotions and ideas. As the teaching artists showed so well in the videos, they listened and responded and took the children's views seriously. We could see as researchers looking at the videos, and we were listening too, but from a distance, I guess, that it was a very safe and inclusive context. And we wanted, this is all based on Lundy's work, we wanted the children to feel that they had weight in thinking about what the character was doing, what the decision making the characters were making, were happening, etc. So very much child-centered, even though we didn't use the usual survey or that kind of method. Over to Michelle.
I went back to diagrams and sort of doodling and notes I'd written from our first workshop planning session to talk to this slide. And sort of rolling on from your last point, Robyn, one of the inspirations that I drew on in talking with you all, the team, and designing how, was this concept of investing power. And with that, I remember that I'd reflected back on some work I'd done in creating a theatre arts play program back in the UK for early learners. I'd been looking into how children watch performance and participate in theatrical play. And so some of that workshop design that I inputted drew on the research from Dr. Matthew Reason and in his paper on drawing the theatrical experience, children drawing the theatrical experience in post-performance workshops. And one of the things that Dr. Reason talked about was that and which we could see, was that responsive and reflective play, that children possess a kind of playful power over a production. They make choices in what and how they play. And so while Dr. Reason was primarily using drawing, and that's what I was thinking about in planning with Robyn and Thomas, and Teresa, actually, and Carla, was that how could I make that concept occur in a three-dimensional way through improvisation, through taking on character, through puppetry play, and those sorts of things. And so in planning the workshop, I sort of took that premise of drawing the theatrical experience and replaced it with being in our bodies, using our voices. And the drawing became three-dimensional, as I said. So the aim was to facilitate young people having power and choice around what they spoke about, what they represented and or imagined from the worlds of Snow and House. And that was it seemed a good way of capturing the long-term effects that the experience of seeing live theatre was having on them. And I'm done.
Olivia.
With all these beautiful productions and children engaging in workshops, how did we follow in our analysis of the data this thread of remaining child-centred, of giving opportunity for children's voices to still be heard and have that reflected in the way we looked at all the video? So one of the ways that we decided to code the data was using Johnny Saldana's dramaturgical coding. And it applies all the words of theatre that so many of us will be familiar with: objectives and conflict and emotions and attitude and subtext. But really what it does is allow the participant's voice, allow us to actually analyse a lived experience. And it was a lovely fit for the data that we had, which was all these videos of workshops. So yes, I've been an audience on your workshops, Michelle, and able to see how the children respond, how the teachers respond, how you respond to the children. And we tried to hang what we saw on around these different codes. One is objectives, which is what the participants want, what their aims are, what they desire, the conflicts that they may encounter in seeking those objectives, and then the tactics that they use to try to overcome them or get around them or have what they want to have happen. They're the things that the actions that people are doing. But we also have the other three codes that are more emotional, the feelings that people express, the attitudes that they express. And then that shows us the subtext, what's underneath. And how we did it was we would each watch 3 to 5 minutes of clips and watch and then start to compare if we were seeing patterns. Were we seeing across the workshops students having similar objectives, teachers having similar objectives, teaching artists having similar objectives? And we developed a pattern across that, which we will now reveal. So what does last? What did we discover? And the first one was about connection and belonging. We could see from the workshops how much we must connect, how much children want to connect with one another, how friendships and play and working together, and how those themes of belonging and being brave or experiencing loneliness that were talked about in the plays then carried on into the workshops, and that it gave children and young people an opportunity to express how much connecting to other people and belonging mattered to them. That was so vivid to me in the codes and in what we watched. And there's some of the quotes here from the children. When do you feel belonging? When I'm with a friend. After one workshop, one student said, I like that we all did it together. And it got me wondering, How many opportunities in their school day do children have and young people have to share that they like being together, that they liked doing things together? Do they have the opportunity to voice that? And as adults, do we give children that opportunity to be listened to in that way? So our first finding was how much connection and belonging matters to children and how theatre reminds them of that. These plays reminded them of that. The second finding was wondering and curiosity, and how theatre sparks that in young children. They wanted to know what was happening to the characters and in their worlds and how it worked. How did they make that slam, that catapult on the puppets? How are these puppets made? And as a researcher with puppetry, it was so interesting to see how much children are fascinated by these objects and how these objects carry meaning. They wanted to know about the actors. They wanted to know what happened backstage. And when the puppets came in, the object of the puppets came into the workshop, that triggered children's memories. It excited them. The object brought about all that suspense and excitement about being in a theatre. It was as though the puppets carried the magic of a theatre performance and something exciting back into their classrooms, back into their school space. And that linked them with the feelings that they had about going to even walking to the play was exciting to them. And they remembered that when they were talking about the puppets. So it was, again, the theatre inspires children to think and to wonder about all those things that they saw and how they looked real, but how did they work out? And the third finding, and this one I think is one that we saw because we didn't just code according to what was spoken, but also the actions, what we saw children do with their bodies. And I think this gets back to what you were speaking about earlier, Michelle, that children were able to name their embodied emotions, but they also showed them. And they showed them through their actions, through their imagery, through their taking on of different roles. And it gave them a permission to talk about things that the theatre evoked in them, but also that the workshops evoked in them. And they were able to express when they felt sad, when they felt scared, when a character felt brave. And those moments were big and they were important. Children talked about they actually cried. And so that they've been given this permission to express their feelings in a very safe environment, which is so fundamental to the Lundy model of voice. And I think that's over to you, Michelle. Back to you.
Thanks, Olivia. Yeah, so for me, the teaching artist as co-researcher, I drew on three main elements in the co-research model, or in the setting up of that safe space model: co-regulation, co-creation, and cooperation. And those three things happening as a sort of a symbiosis in the space. Firstly, with co-regulation, holding the room, energy, those things. In order for children to feel safe to speak up, it was about being in our bodies first. So playing in a way where there's not a test to get it right. In fact, we move right away from any idea of technique. We become very in our body. We're aware of our breath. We do exercises with breath as a whole group, taking group breaths. And we use it to feel grounded and check in with how we are feeling. So that consciousness, or that sense of being able to talk about feelings and notice emotions in the characters and the puppets and identify with the puppets emotionally, which a lot of the children did, started with ourselves. And it started with me, or the other teaching artists who were leading in modeling that sort of self-regulation as co-regulation with breathing and body. And then co-creation, I got the children quite often to collectively mark out a playing space. So it's kind of a fairly ritualistic thing in a way, where we actually take big rubber dots and plastic dots, and we actually make a space. And inside that space, we're not following the same rules as we usually follow in the classroom. And in that space, I model naturalizing, imaginative, emotional, mystical, rational, and wonderful responses, ideas, and experiences. I also model in that co-creative space an enthusiasm for play and magic and comedy and eccentricity and being very human. And so I model all those traits in myself, and I encourage them in the children. And one of the ways I do that is that I play my harmonica as an amateur. I'm self-taught, but I find that modeling, trying something and doing something non-verbal but vocal is a great way to establish a different kind of way of communicating. And also you have the sort of the pleasurable entrainment of rhythm. So we start to connect on different levels through different ways of communicating. And then I thread that back in the researching, really, with recruiting the children as researchers by asking them, like, how is that for you in your body? Like, how was that for the turkey, do you think, to be put in a small space? How was that for you to be in a small space? And we start to inquire together as a collective. So it's that thing again of investing power. I'm not the expert and I'm not the scientist. I'm one of them, or I'm one of many, and we're all inquiring together about this magical world of house or snow. In creating that sort of, in linking to real roles and jogging memory, there's those sort of two concepts of the reality of the theatre and the theatrical experience, and the evoked delusion of the theatrical experience and the worlds of house. So some of my questions as a co-researching teaching artist were to sort of place us imaginatively beyond that space again, such as, you know, what if you were to go through a portal into the world of snow, what would you like to do there? And so use those sort of open-ended imaginative tasks as a way to jog memory about the performance, rather than look again for right answers that would usually kind of dull things down for everybody, including myself. And then finally, just actually connecting to what Olivia was talking about, creating that and holding that safe space through co-creation and co-regulation, I think results in cooperation. And again, the children as co-researchers with me. And I like to talk about, it can be a term that not everybody likes, but I like to talk about participation mystique, that phenomenon where the creative space becomes, and it's an anthropological term that Jung borrowed from Levi Bruhl, but it's that concept where the children moving beyond the idea of being at school and the right answer and teachers and all the usual roles and hierarchies, but we're in this imaginative space together, which is sort of a blueprint of what we've seen in the theatre of house or snow. And we begin to sort of identify, for example, again, like with the turkey, to the point where one group who were actually pretty challenging to manage that day spontaneously erupted when I asked them to draw their memories into this sort of ritual worship of the turkey. And they were chanting, "Save the turkey, save the turkey." And they were doing this sort of worshipping action in unison. And it was a very ritualistic kind of spontaneous outbreak where the children really took power over the room, over the workshop, through their collective remembering and through that sort of participation mystique, that kind of mystical world which they created together. And that's me done.
Thanks, Michelle. As Robyn already foreshadowed, there were some constraints and challenges with this project that I'm just going to talk very briefly about. A research project of this kind is just genuinely difficult to do, and these constraints really matter, but they tend to matter sometimes for this longitudinal study, but for research projects generally. So I'm sure it's no secret to many of you here tonight that school timetables can be very tight. Sessions with young people can be very short. Behavioral policies shape what can happen in the room, and teacher participation is not always consistent. And over a longitudinal project like this, there can also be significant drift and change in leadership, which can have an impact on the continuity, particularly around staffing and the continuity of the sort of idea of the project as a whole. Also, families moving meant that some young people that might have been in workshop number 2 didn't make it to workshop number 3, for example. There were also broader sector issues as well, including the sort of organizational, uh, personnel turnover constraints. And these don't necessarily just sit outside research. They're probably sort of part of the reality of arts engagement generally in schools. And they shape what impact can look like in practice. And they remind us that if we want sustained cultural participation, we need structures to support that kind of engagement. I'm handing over to Robyn.
Okay, well, we still have work to do. This is a work in progress, and one of the things that we want to do, having interviewed Michelle along the way, we also want to, of course, interview the Barking Gecko Arts team, particularly the creative learning manager Kim Walsh and the coordinator of engagement and access Heather Bongiovanni. We also welcome back Carla Narella to the project, who was involved right at the beginning and has been on maternity leave. So we also want to get the perspectives of some of the adults involved in the project as well to bring that. We need to continue the post-show workshops for the next play. And I guess ultimately what we hope to show is that live performance isn't ephemeral for young children, but while some details, as Michelle said in that brilliant quote in her interview, some of the details fade away, but the children do sustain some very vivid ideas and feelings and thoughts about these opportunities. I think we also, I guess, want to advocate very strongly for children and youth arts, because over the last decade or so, funding has not been abundant, and we'd like to be able to demonstrate how important it is for children and young people to be able to engage in arts and participate in cultural experiences like this, and that equity matters. It needs to be available and accessible for all children. So we still have work to do, and stay tuned. I hope we'll have an opportunity to present again once we've had a chance to finish the project. Thomas?
Thanks, Robyn. So like you say, the sort of next steps are around completing the arc of the project. There are further workshops, a new live performance in the sequence, and then continuing that co-design process between researchers, teaching artists, and arts company. And we're looking to sort of synthesize the patterns across the cohorts and the plays and the time points that the young people engage with the work. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening this evening. We'd now like to throw it open to you if you have any questions for the team. And we'd be happy to answer them. You feel free to put them in the chat if you have any questions. One thing I would say is that if any of you are working in schools or theatre or research or policy, and you're thinking about equitable access and the longer term evaluation of arts experiences, we'd be very keen to talk to you and answer any questions you might have.
What was the most surprising finding, or the thing that you weren't expecting as you went through the data? Anything, or?
Good question.
I think it was the extent to which the young people responded emotionally to the to the work. I was sort of blown away by their willingness to express that in workshops and express it openly without kind of fear of embarrassment that I would have perhaps naively and somewhat embarrassingly would have expected young people to be slightly more hesitant or reticent about the emotional depth of what they were experiencing. Which says more about me than them, I think. But yeah, that's certainly something that surprised me and delighted me about this work.
I guess I agree with you, Thomas. It blows me away because I think often underestimate young children and the complexity of the issues that they wonder about. And I think that's been a mark of the quality of Barking Gecko Theatre, Barking Gecko Theatre Arts, is that they do deal in their plays with complex issues. And so children and families are then able to wonder and dialogue about these issues. So I guess I wasn't surprised because I've seen it before, but it was wonderful to have it reinforced in a sense, and hopefully that we will be able to share these findings and convey how important it is for children not to be deprived of the opportunities to talk about the big life issues.
We have a question here in the chat from Harrison. Did you observe any specific qualities in the works themselves that appeared to contribute to their long-term resonance for children? Michelle, maybe you want to answer that, hon.
Yeah. I'm just thinking because I've taught workshops across 3 of the shows. One we haven't talked about here, which is called Reasons to Stay Inside. Yeah, I think I talked about this with Thomas and Robyn in the interview. The thing is that what I could see is in children's theatre, you need to put something in it that they can resonate with, that they can identify with. And in-house children could identify with loneliness, very much so. They could identify with strife, family strife and separation. They could identify equally with enjoyment of new friendships and magical objects and contraptions. They could identify in snow with not being listened to as a smaller person in contrast to big adults who were represented by large personalities and sometimes large people in the village of Kishka. They could really identify with knowing they've got an idea, knowing they've got a solution and not being taken seriously. And in Reasons to Stay Inside, just the action of listing the things that make them anxious. So those are some of the things that qualities in the works that they could identify with and resonate with. And in the second or third workshop, those themes and concepts or ideas or images or characters, they held. They didn't stop talking about those same things that I just listed and more. They held. In fact, in some instances, the detail of the show itself, as I said, kind of like dissolved somewhat, but the heart, the crux of the theme remained, and the desire to talk about that with each other and play at some of those themes in embodied improvisation got stronger over time. These, I call them, pulse points. They're emotional pulse points. They stayed, and they had more as children matured, because I've seen them over a two-year period. As they matured, they had even more profound, reflective, compassionate, intellectual, critical offerings to share. And what is awesome about this project is, as they become familiar with the workshop format and me being with them, and this license to express, be critical in their thinking, have differences and disagreements creatively, they get really competent at contributing those things or those reflections on the concepts that resonate, if that makes sense. And sometimes verbally, and sometimes it's through their own performance or their own improvisation. So yeah, pretty fascinating, pretty strong.
A question from Ionia. In terms of working with children to gain each of these findings, was there an overall collective agreement depicted in both groups, or were there significant differences or outliers that were interesting to observe? Interesting question, Ionia. Yes. Who wants to grab that one? It's a long time to cast your minds back, I'm sure. But yeah.
I certainly think there was a lot of resonance, as Michelle said, around being able to identify with things like loneliness and the importance of friendship. I can't remember specific outliers.
Outliers, yeah. Sometimes there is in research, there's like a shocking kind of like X factor, but yeah. So
when we sort of were reviewing the workshop material, which was essentially involved sort of coding the long workshop recordings, just in terms of outliers, I think for me the more interesting outliers were sort of more often than not children whose responses didn't follow a kind of neat sort of recall model, where they might not have remembered the performance in a kind of linear or a correct way, but they retained a very strong emotional or like a sensory, or even a completely imaginative connection or trace. And I think this is significant in the research because I guess it suggests that kind of legacy. One of the legacies of engaging with live theatre is that it doesn't need to look like sort of factual memory. And it might look like a feeling or a question or an image or a repeated return to one sort of striking theatrical moment. Yeah, I would be cautious about claiming like a fully uniform collective agreement, without sort of like going through the data in sort of again, I suppose. But yeah, I think yeah, I sort of think that was the most interesting thing for me was that those responses that were not neat, that were childlike, in their brilliance. Yeah.
And a question from Alana, can you talk a little bit more about the ways that the research was code-designed? Were the children part of the code designing, or was it more the teachers teaching artists Barking Gecko code design of the work?
I know that when we first started working on this research project, the work that Barking Gecko was commissioning and producing was made in consultation with what was then known as the Young Geckos. I think I'm getting that correct. The I think that the truth of the matter is that the overall study was developed by adults, the adult research team, um, as opposed to young people being involved in the kind of original sort of like research questions. But we really aimed to give the young people involved in this project as much meaningful agency as we could in terms of how their responses were elicited and how they shaped those responses to the workshops and how they were interpreted through the workshops. And I think this is where the child's voice becomes kind of central to the project. Would the rest of the research team sort of agree with that?
I was going to say that it's not exactly co-design, but I guess in some ways, speaking to what Thomas said, is that the workshops were not all up on your feet embodied activities. There were multi-modes that we used, such as drawing, discussion, sculpting and physical improvisation, arranging images, slides from photography from the show, of scenes of the show. So there were different modes through which the children could respond and discuss and make sense of or otherwise. Yeah, and the gecko ensembles were what they were called. The gecko ensembles no longer run, but they were a group where we did have a model for some time where Carla Narella would create a provocation pack, and we would, with the group, actually workshop and creatively respond to themes and ideas in building a new show. And that was the case for House, and it was the case for Snow. No, not Snow, because that was written by Finnegan Crookmeyer, but for Snow, that was definitely part of the process. So the children in the ensembles responded to themes and ideas, and then the writer Dan and the director Luke threaded those into the show they made.
So they might not have been designing, like co-designing the actual methodology, but the children's voices, like there's multiple access points for them, all of them, every one of them to be included and met where they were at. I think
we spared them the joy of designing the methodology and doing a literature review for this research project. We didn't want to
think
crowd
it's
out
closer to a more mosaic approach where we're using a variety of data to listen to children, listen to young people's voices.
There's a question here. Can I throw this to you? How do you see this study applying in general to students across WA schools? So these, just to be clear, these workshops weren't run in schools, but with young theatre groups. But thinking about the educational implications and thinking about your amazing work in early childhood with puppeteering, and when you reflect on these findings and what teachers might do with them, how does it translate?
I think it translates to how important theatre is for young people, and how that lovely marriage between a theatre company and a school, where you have that co-teaching between teaching artists and teachers being present, and them working the opportunities that they have to start to see their students differently and see their students engage with other teachers and engage in their learning in other ways. We talk about students being disengaged from their learning. That was not evident in anything that I saw. Students were engaged and wanting to be there and wanting to reveal who they are. And we are social creatures. And more than ever now, we need to create opportunities for children and young people to connect socially with one another. And the objects of puppets and the objects of the theatre create a perfect environment to create for permission for that. So to have a model that goes into different schools, that is connected to a theatre company, that's connected to a performance, and I saw in the question in the chat, a question from Catherine, is it a lost performance? No, but it's not as meaningful as it can be. That translation that can happen is having that education piece, or teaching artist, I think is the better word, that comes to a school and works with children in schools to make meaning and understanding of that performance together. I think that's where we should be applying this. Does that
Yeah.
answer the question?
Yeah, I
Robyn,
think
add something.
But just to add that even more broadly, I think this demonstrates the role that arts-rich pedagogy, in this case particularly drama, but there were other art forms embedded in there too, can play and should play, not just after a live performance, but with a picture book, with a science topic. You know, I think this adds, I guess, to that body of research that demonstrates the role that arts-rich pedagogy should be playing in across the curriculum. I think this is just one instance. I know there's lots of other research as well, but we need to make sure that we disseminate this kind of evidence broadly, you know, to give teachers more broadly the opportunity to see what can happen.
We have a great question from Sue here. What a wonderful research project! Exclamation mark. I'm fascinated by the concept of shared collective remembering. Over the course of the workshops, did you notice children growing in their capacity for shared remembering or enabling the voice of others? So I guess it's that kind of transferability of cognitive skills and communication skills. What observations did you have around that over the course of this luxury of having, you know, a longitudinal lens?
Michelle, did you notice anything across the series of workshops?
Yeah, absolutely. Which was, I sort of touched on it before, but it's about you know, you even though I'm only there for an hour and a half or an hour or whatever, but you are with them creating a culture of participation. And this particular kind of culture of participation, I think, as a consequence of the co-design with Robyn and Thomas and the other teaching artists and professionals from Create, and the fact that we do the same, almost do the same workshop, we tweak it slightly over the time. The culture grows very quickly into one of listening to the other children, not just through what they say, but how they behave, how they sit, how they decide to take a risk and jump in and show their memory or show their expressive response or invent a new story from the show that they saw. So there's a culture of participation, listening, and a sort of almost like egging each other on to become more confident as critics and as writers and as performers and as thinkers. So it's very, very rich in that way. It happens quite quickly. It happens within the first workshop in most situations, but because we reproduce the workshop with small tweaks or a similar workshop but a new show, they're learning how to be they're learning how to be makers and thinkers together. They don't just look at me or Kim Walsh or whoever, or Carla, whoever else is teaching. They look to each other. So that's what I mean about they're kind of doing their own research. It's really powerful, and it's the thing that can occur because they're not sitting behind desks working to the right answer. This whole project is about asking questions, but we can ask questions by going into this imaginative realm. And that just loosens up so much in terms of children that I see who are quite perhaps inhibited or quite reticent, or maybe just are used to maybe being told off or being told to be quiet or are used to being quiet. They will over time shift out of those ways of being and try something else. And that, yeah, so yeah, I definitely see that over time.
Yeah, it's the famous drama effect, really, isn't it? The way it influences children that might be on the margins in traditional kind of behind the desk learning. Um, yeah, it's an extraordinary mode. We have a question from Ionia Thomas. Were there schools that had an opportunity to build relationships with barking geckos through the research, or did the ban on government school research kind of inhibit that aspect of maybe building bridges between school and theatre?
Look, Barking Gecko, as the kind of preeminent youth arts organisation based in Perth, but in Western Australia, has rich, deep, and long-running connections to a range of schools around Western Australia, and they had a pre-existing relationship with the two schools that we worked in with these workshops. So I guess the short answer is that Barking Gecko Theatre Company is always building relationships with schools, not just through the Inspire program. I think that there's been an added depth that's come with these particular schools that we were working with because of the nature of the program, the kind of returning to the schools over and over. I was sort of interested in this other question from Catherine around whether the learning is lost if there's no proper follow-up. And I just thought I've been sort of thinking about that. Like, I think one of the things that this study would suggest is that post-performance work does something important. It doesn't create meaning from nothing, but it does help children return to the performance through speech or embodiment or image making and collaboration. And what our study sort of suggests is that that process can deepen memory and prompt new questions and allow children to hear and build on one another's interpretations and sort of gain different perspectives. And I think that so I wouldn't say that the learning is necessarily lost, but I think it is much more likely to remain this kind of fragile, private, unexamined thing unless it's supported through high quality arts rich follow-ups, would be my sort of suggestion and what we found from this work.
Do you think, like, of the different cognitive modes of imagining or remembering, what do you think was more evident in the data that you saw? Like, did the workshops seem to foster recall and memory, or imagining more strongly? Or is it hard to say that wasn't necessarily something you were looking at comparing?
I saw students from watching the videos much more than responding to recall or memory, but evoking feelings and connections and relationships. And there was just awareness of self. Children were making meaningful connections to their own lives. So it wasn't just the details of the theatrical performance. No, I think it was much more the significance of those moments and then what it evoked either through the senses or through their bodies and in their interactions with other people. The meaning was much deeper.
And when it came to the modes of data, like some of it was drawing, some of it was tableau, like frozen images of their bodies, etc., which were the most fruitful when you were looking to kind of glean their perceptions? Which did you find, generated the richest data? Bit of a mix.
It was very
Because they
rich
all
data.
inform each other.
Yeah.
They all add to the picture. They're like pieces of
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think about
So
the
they
mosaic
really
approach. It's patchwork.
yeah.
They all add,
Yeah.
enrich, and deepen. They tell
Yeah.
a deeper story.
And the volume of data for this project
Was
is
huge.
immense. Is immense. And that's a great privilege, to
Yeah.
work in that way. But it does mean that picking a favorite is very difficult.
Yeah,
Well, video in and of itself, I remember from my master's video, like coding, describing hours of video is a long process. Yeah, hats off to you. It sounds like such an incredible piece of work that has been done and that is still ongoing. Yeah, it's really exciting. Does anyone else want to ask anything? The people that are here with us online.
Well, Anna has a question.
Oh, where's that? Thank you. I didn't even see that.
The potential to inform the Australian curriculum writers, particularly supporting a more integrated approach. Well, I definitely think, it does have potential, Anna, to inform curriculum writers, especially those, as you say, who are thinking about integrating, working in a transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary way. Whether we would have the opportunity to do that is another question.
That's another research project in itself, Anna, that we're working hard to fund and cook up at our end. Yeah.
I would say, in response to that, as Olivia said, that there hasn't really been much of a challenge in delivering the workshops and getting the young people to engage. So that power of twinning the workshop, the practical exploration, the creative exploration with first seeing something together as a collective seems to me to be an outstanding model that would be really, really profitable for everybody into, sociological, emotional level, to give all children that opportunity. There's something about going out of the school that's really important. That shared experience of sitting in the dark in a blackout, of hearing your peers or other school kids scream, of being on the bus, of thinking about the whole journey, not just being in the sort of evocative world of the show, but the practical world of being on a bus, sitting in a theatre in a place you may never have been ever. The children sort of talk about how they sort of, they've got a little bit of distance to reflect on being different together outside of the classroom. And I think that I was thinking when people were asking questions about the shared remembering, that part of that is that over time, the children kind of make their own mythologies of the day they went to the theatre. They create their own folklore around themselves as people that have had an adventure. And that's just like unbelievably empowering, because it's who can I be in this world outside of this classroom and in it. I can be someone who invents a life for myself. And so I don't think it's just useful. I think it's imperative to supporting young people in the world that we find ourselves in at the moment.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
And actually, there's all that Project Zero stuff, Anna, that Harvard put out, where looking at kind of visible thinking strategies and critical thinking in the classroom. And it's very similar to arts-based modes of thinking and reflecting on work and collaborating and thinking through the arts. Like, I think you've hit it on the head. There's absolutely so much that the arts have to offer curriculum design. But yeah, somehow that it's just not translating yet. But one day I'm sure it will. We have another. Do we have another question? Sorry, have I missed anyone else? I'm not a very good facilitator of questions. Do you think no? Do you think that no? What have I missed, folks? Great answer, Thomas.
I think we've covered them all, Tash.
I would like to hear from BG.
Yeah.
One from Sari. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that not correctly. Apologies if not. I would like to hear from BG about what this research will mean for them as an arts organisation. Kim Walsh, I see your name out there, and I know your camera's off, and you're probably in your pajamas. But is there a possibility, Kim, that you might want to speak to this question about how this research, or what this research might mean for Barking Gecko as an organisation? Kim might not even be there. She might have nipped off to get a cup of tea.
I think
Yeah, we can come back to you on that, I think. Yeah, Robyn.
I was just going to say, I think that might be part of the next presentation in a sense, because, you know, hopefully once we've finished the research and Barking Gecko Arts will be able to look at it in its entirety and think about what it means for them and where, you know, what the implications might be in terms of what they do next or where they go next. So I think it might be too early to ask that question, but thank you, Kerry. It's a very important question, of course, that Barking Gecko are the reason why we began the research. So it's very important that we hear from them about what it means.
Hey, Robyn, I am here. It's Kim. How are you?
Hey, wonderful. Sorry to put you on the spot there,
No,
Kim.
not at all, not at all. We're all still we're working late in the office. So look, this is really exciting for us, but we're unsure, like Robyn said, it's still not completed. But all these things I feel as an arts org, we see that every time we're in a school. We see that every time after the theatre, but the emotional involvement is always, it's not surprising to us because we see it in the classrooms that we're going to and in the theatre, as I said. So it's really exciting research, and yeah, we just wait to see what this will translate into, and also as a newly kind of combined org of Barking Gecko Arts, like awesome arts and Barking Gecko Theatre. We're a new company. So yeah, I guess it's just a really exciting time for the company itself.
Yep.
Yeah, it sounds like a really exciting time, especially branching out into multiple art forms. I think that's
Yeah, which
yeah.
we've always done a little bit in Barking Gecko Theatre anyway, as Michelle and Carla would know, when we used to run ensembles, there was so many kind of art forms that all the kids would be involved in every time they were at a workshop. So yeah, it is exciting, but really not surprising at all, I think, that these findings, because it's something we kind of all know, I think, as a human collective, how important theatre is. And I think this research is really important moving forward.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Anyone else with anything they would like to ask? I'm so impressed with the turnout. We're really, really happy for everyone who's come and joined us this evening to hear about the work. Thank you to Robyn, Thomas, Michelle, Olivia, Kim, everyone at Barking Gecko. It's just really inspiring for me in the work that I do to hear about the work that you have done and will do. It's not a small thing, you know, that there's not a lot of appreciation sometimes for the arts, but I think everyone who has bothered to log in tonight recognizes the very, very deep, powerful impacts that it can have for children. And we are so lucky to be working in such a beautiful medium and often with some very beautiful people by our side. So yeah, thank you again for sharing. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you all.